Hello, the internet, and welcome back to another episode of the Ideas About God podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Josh.
And I am Fabian. I am the other host. Ideas About God is a podcast where we talk about theology, life, pop culture, all kinds of things with the hope of making ideas about God more interesting, maybe helpful for your life. And so we hope that this is helpful and entertaining as well. Some mixture of that. So really quick, hit the plus button on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on Spotify. We're up to like 26 subscribers.
That's 24.
Yeah.
That is more than 24 subscribers. That is 2 baker's dozens.
So that's pretty awesome. That's just cool. Yeah, we got to celebrate. Yeah. So we have subscribers. But yes, please subscribe. Leave us a review. 5 stars only. If it's 4 stars, we'll find a way to delete it. But I don't think
we'll sneak one more in. Just like
or we'll find you. Just kidding. Thank you so much for doing that. And we're gonna dive straight into today's episode. This is actually going to be a series of episodes, which I'm really excited about because I think I will personally learn a lot in this series as I hear from you and as we dialogue and process things together on podcast form.
Yeah.
I think it's something that'll be fun and hopefully helpful for people that are listening to this or watching this. So we're going to be talking about process theology. Yep. So do you want to give us a very short definition?
Yeah.
It's probably hard. A definition of process theology. And then for this episode, we're going to share sort of how we have come to a place where we would say that we're process theology people. Process
I don't know what that
party.
means. We're in the process party.
We're in the process party, but it kind of how we've gotten to it. So give us a little bit of a...
Okay, so the quickest way I can think of to define like what process philosophy is all of those big fancy words that you may have learned growing up talking about God, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, right? These words of like just giving God these like totalizing attributes. Those are things that we, or I, as someone who like kind of holds on to process ideas, I push against. I don't think God is all powerful. I mean, kinda, but like I redefine what power means very differently than what someone who might hold on to a quote unquote classical theistic idea. I think God knows everything, but also like I think like, there are certain things that can't be known because they don't exist as a reality, right? They only exist as like probabilities. So like you can get really like kind of lost in the weeds. That's basically my process philosophy comes down to this idea that God is not in charge of the universe, but that God is partnering with the universe and inviting it into like more love, more life, more vitality, and then what those like kind of things God is inviting us into, that's probably open for debate. But instead that God is not coercive with the universe. That's how I would define process philosophy at like a very, very high level.
Yeah.
Real quick. Elevator pitch.
Yeah. That was good.
Yeah.
If I was in an elevator with you, I'd be interested in
like,
more.
Please get off. You're like rapidly tapping the door open button.
Let's go. Just kidding. No, that was.
Yeah.
So,
thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your experience with process theology? How did you get to the place where you're at right now with your understanding of God? Yeah.
Okay. So it all started and God damn it, Kid Ham was right. Once you start questioning creationism, the whole thing is falling apart.
So the slippery slope is actually real.
Is really real. And let me tell you, it's powerful. It's true, but in a weird roundabout way. So I grew up as a young earth creationist, right?
Yeah.
Like I say, like, it's cringy.
And define for the people, what does that mean?
Yeah. Okay, so unless you grew up in like the weird part, I don't mean that derogatorily, as if like my parents are weird, but like unless you grew up in that weird, like kind of right-wing-ish space, evangelical space that I grew up in, like creationism is this idea that says that the world is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
and that God made everything in 6 days. Like, so they look at the creation narrative in Genesis 1 and they read that as literal history.
Yeah.
And then they shoehorn into that like dinosaurs and the flood. They're like, no, that was a real thing. That was like, there's a lot of like discourse about how that was actually what killed the dinosaurs. And there's this whole like machine that goes into like keeping this idea afloat. Like Ken Ham has a museum. Ken Ham is a guy who kind of like one of the modern, like champions for this idea.
Yeah, he debated Bill Nye.
Which
I think was a complete mistake, because then it like
you can't
made it seem legitimate. No. Like his position was like scientifically arguable.
Yeah,
and it's totally not.
And that's a side tangent. It's just like when two different parties are trying to have a debate but hold like entirely different like views on ontology, like what really is real, like what's real reality, like you can't have a debate at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's impossible because you're not even looking at the same set of data, or like you're not even looking at the same whatever.
Yeah.
God,
you have some passions around this, I know.
Man drives me insane. So like I grew up as a creationist, right? I thought I was a creationist at some point, and then of course like that falls apart when you encounter science.
Yeah.
And like evolution is real. It's just in fact it takes place on a process. It is so slow that the human brain has a really hard time wrapping its head around it. Yeah. Like millions of years is a very long effing time. But anyway, so like I was like coming around to like thinking like, okay, so well then how do I read Genesis? And someone along the way recommended a website to me, BioLogos. Mm-hmm. And BioLogos, some of the writers who I still really like, or I got their starts on there, like Pete Enns, or not, maybe didn't start on there, but like they wrote on there. That's how I first got introduced to them. It's like Peter Enns, Greg Boyd, a few others. But BioLogos was like, okay, we can take scripture seriously. We can also take science seriously. So we're going to believe scientists when they're like, the earth is 4.3 billion years. Dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. We can take, that's real. And then also, well, then there are real ways, here are ways we can read Genesis. And this is like the first time I get introduced to like reading the Bible through like anything other than like a literal type of reading, right?
Yeah.
Like, like this can be metaphorical, and it can be important and helpful.
Kind of moving away from like an errant sense, yes, which says that it's literal, and moving maybe towards inspired, where it can be inspired by God, but that doesn't mean that you have to take it at face value.
Yeah. And so that's the first time I've ever like had like real like actual people like talk about that I'm like, I get this. Yeah. This makes sense. But anyway, somewhere along the way, I read a book or read an article on the website by a guy named Greg Boyd.
Yeah.
And Greg Boyd, I ended up clicking over to his website and like finding his blog. So like I used to work at a desk job, and this is all I did. Like I could get most of my work done in like maybe I did 10 hours of real work in a week, and the rest of them I was just like deconstructing my faith. The other 30. And
they paid you to have
a
crisis.
Yeah, which I mean, if we're gonna have an existential crisis, like you might as well get paid for it. You know,
it's a great time.
That's a great time. Just yeah. So I went over Greg Boyd's website and like explored it, and he is, or at the time, I don't know if he still is, would describe himself as an open theist. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of like this is like the step. This is a stepping stone into a process philosophy. So an open theist is someone who looks at the world and says that the future is open. Mm. Okay. So when I was growing up, one of the hot theological debate was Calvinism versus Arminianism.
Yeah.
So Calvinism is this idea that God knows, God is in control of the future, and even down to like your salvation, right? So God, from the moment you are born, and even 1,000 years before that, and 1,000,000 years before that, God knows that you're going to be born, knows that you are not going to quote unquote become a Christian, and knows that you're going to hell.
Yeah,
and that's just it, right? Like the future, God is in control, and boom, everything that bad has happened.
Is predetermined.
Yeah. Everything that's good has been predetermined.
Yeah.
Your free will that you feel like you have is not really real, because God knows is in control. I don't know. That's I guess if you want to live your life that way, that's fine.
Yeah.
So that's Calvinism. The other side of that, and this is the side that I kind of always leaned toward because I was like, well, it seems to make more sense to me. Was free will, was Arminianism, and somehow Arminianism was like God knows the future, and yet you have free will.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, how does that work? Well, you just shrug, like, and I'm like, I feel like I have choices, right? I make choices that, those feel like I'm making choices. And granted, neurologists now are coming along and being like, well, like your choices are actually like far more complicated in your brain. But I'm like, well, something about it like feels like I can I can work at turning myself into a person that given the opportunity does something like good, right?
Yeah.
So if I if I'm like, oh, like I work on becoming a better person, then given the opportunity, like I'll be kind, like I feel like, yeah, I can, I have choices, I have agency in the world. And Arminianism like holds on to that, but also still holds the idea that God knows the future. Open theism.
And also to
Sorry,
add to it, I was going to just to add a little bit to it. Also that God does things.
Yes.
So that God is involved.
Yes.
Now, it gets trickier with Arminianism because in Calvinism, God does everything.
Mm-hmm.
In Arminianism, you kind of have this gray area of, well, what does God do and what doesn't God do?
Yes.
And so that I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, yes. That's another important thing is both of these ideas hold on to that God also is an active agent in the universe.
Yeah.
Or can be if God chooses to be an active agent in the
and
universe.
like a supernatural way.
Right,
Yeah.
in a supernatural way. It can come in and like break the laws of physics and like boom, cured you of cancer or made a person rise from the dead or, like any sorts of things, right, that God could do. Creation ex nihilo or something like that. And so like I was like, okay, I probably would have called myself Arminian. It's not like stumble on Greg Boyd, and he's talking about open theism.
Yeah.
And he's like, God doesn't know the future because the future does not exist yet.
Mm.
And that was his big point, was that he talks like, and he had like these logical proofs where he had like, he's like watching like these different logical if then statements that I found interesting and compelling. I can't tell you what they are now. But just this idea like the future doesn't exist as like a real reality, right? The past exists, right? I like exactly 6 minutes ago, I know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But 6 minutes from now, I won't know. Like I don't know what can happen.
No
I have an idea that hopefully I'm still here recording a podcast with you.
If not the rapture,
if not the rapture,
and then the Calvinists were right.
Well, maybe not Calvinists. I know the pre-tribulationists were.
That's true. Yes, yeah.
But like,
see, that's where my theology falls flat because I just refuse to study that
you,
stuff. I give it no dignity.
Did you not read Left Behind?
No, I did not read
Not
Left
even Left
Behind. I
Behind
was
for
not
kids?
traumatized by the book.
Those books fucked me up. Like woo.
We have one person here that can commiserate with the Left Behind traumatized.
Really?
That's you.
Yeah. Okay, it's great. Anyways, so where were we? We were talking about
the proofs that
the proofs. Okay, yes.
Had, yeah.
So, but and this kind of plays out with what we understand from science, right?
Yeah.
Like that, like quantum states like exist in probability fields, right?
Yeah.
Where like things don't actually coalesce until like we act on them.
Yeah.
And then, then like, oh, the electron is here and it stops existing as like a probability wave and it collapses into a single point. And basically like, he's like, yeah, the future exists like that, right? There's a whole bunch of probabilities. Like it is highly improbable that I'm going to fly out of the window.
Yeah.
It's not unlikely. It's not like, but it's not, out of the realm of possibility,
Yeah.
like something like, I don't know. There's lots of like things can happen in the future. It has directions that it could take, but it is, but like things are more there are things that are more likely to happen than not.
Yeah.
And the way he played it was like, okay, so how does God play into this? Well, it's like God is intimately aware, of the present, right?
Yeah.
And so because God is intimately aware of the present, then God can like know with those knows the future, but knows the future as a probability.
Yeah.
God knows there's a 40% chance that you're going to do this and a 30% chance you're going to do Y.
Yeah.
And like boom, and that's okay. So like he says that like he makes the analogy of like a chess player, right? So a good chess player can like plan out like X amount of moves, right?
Yeah.
A great chess player can plan out like this amount of moves. Like I know if you do here, I have this, and it sees like this big like branching decision tree of like I go here and you go here and I go here and like I have it all mapped out.
Yeah.
And God, he's like Boyd's argument was like, well, God is doing that with everything all the time. So God can have God's aims. God can desire things to happen and work things. That's where
would you say everything everywhere all at once?
Yes.
Throw back to one of our old
Boom.
episodes.
That's called a callback, baby. But yeah, so God, that's what God is doing. God is like playing chess with everything everywhere all at once, and can plan out an infinite amount of moves because God is all creative. That's another thing he would describe God as being infinitely creative to be able to work to achieve God's ends. So Boyd, however, it would not identify as a process theologian.
Yeah.
Because I think Greg Boyd still holds on to the idea that God can intervene in the world, right? So God can supernaturally break physics if God wants to make something happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's the line where like open theism, and sometimes called open and relational theism, kind of stops here. And then on the other side of that line is process philosophy. And the demarcator is going to be whether or not you believe God can and does intervene in like physical reality. Does God supernaturally do things in the world?
Yeah. Like does God coerce humans, or does God force physics to work a certain way to get a certain outcome?
Yes.
And something that we're going to talk about more, but I just was thinking about this as you were talking about, and I know you're telling your story, is there's, someone that maybe comes from a more classical understanding of theology might say, well, like you're letting discoveries in science and other areas inform your understanding of God. And really that's been happening the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Like from the very beginning, as we have classical theism, it was informed by the metaphysics of the day. And so it's almost like as we understand the world more through other disciplines like science, like physics, chemistry, biology,
right,
then we're starting to say, okay, maybe this can help us understand at a greater depth what God's character is actually like, or what God is. And so, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but so you went from Greg Boyd open theism to
process.
I
think that sort of happened. I don't know when exactly that happened. There wasn't like an author or something like that I stumbled on like all at once. I think one big one would be Trip Fuller from Homebrew Christianity, and then maybe Philip Clayton.
Yeah.
I read one of his books, and I thought it was really interesting. And for me, what made the jump was in open theism, you still have the question of what do you do, like when God doesn't show up, like. It seems dumb, like it seems not dumb. It seems shitty to have a God who can intervene, but chooses not to. You're still stuck with that, like theodicy. And I think we're going to talk about that more in depth in the future. But you're still stuck with that question of like, you have a God who chooses to do something, but doesn't. And I'm like, okay, so we have a God who could have stopped the Holocaust. We have a God who could have saved untold millions of billions of people from like an infinite amount of heartache and pain, and yet chooses not to. And at some point you have to answer for that, right? You have to say like, why was it? And that to me is like, I don't think any answer is good enough, right? Like I personally can come around and like, oh, some like bad shit's happened in my life, but like I've learned from it. But like I don't just because I can say that now doesn't mean I will be able to say that in the future, right?
Yeah.
There might be something horrific that could happen that could be like, there's no atoning for this,
Yeah,
right? There is no way to make this good. Also, like I can't say that I can't be prescriptive of other people, right? If a person is like, I lost my child or something, right? I can't be like, there's nothing that I can say that's going to be like, well, it's, it's all part of God's plan when you experience some sort of horrific thing. Like you want to like punch that person in the face. And because it feels so like intensely like dismissive.
Yeah.
But like the question is that it's not, I don't find that just like trite and unhelpful, because if at the end of the day, like it's true, fuck that. Right.
Yeah.
Like even if like that person is like, they're being helpful, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh yeah, it actually was part of God's plan that you go through this horrific tragedy. Like, no, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Like,
This whole enterprise, we're done with it.
yeah. I don't want to be a part of that. And God can, kick rocks. Then like that, to me, that's what led me to, I think that's one of my biggest thing with process philosophy. And process philosophy comes along and says, the reason God didn't stop those things is because God can't. And that's where a lot of people like jump off the train, because they're like, we have a hard time with this idea that there's a God that cannot do things.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, I have a hard time with a God who can do those things and doesn't. So a process philosopher would look at that God and what does God function in the world. It says God is ultimately non-coercive.
Yeah.
God cannot coerce you, me. It cannot coerce. And it's another thing process philosophy holds on to is like ultimate process philosopher. This idea of like all of the universe is experiencing something. So God cannot coerce even the atoms that make up this desk to do something. The word that process theologians will sort of throw around is invite.
Yeah.
This process, God has is present to all things, and all things are in some way also then therefore present to God, right? So like God is in relationship with the dog, the microphone cables, the atoms that make up the copper and the microphone cables to like you and me, and God is present to all of that, and all those things are in a sense like able to respond to the divine invitation. And then we could have conversations on what does that divine invitation look like? What is the invitation being given to?
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean for like a table to respond to the divine invitation?
Yeah.
And as opposed to like a dog, as opposed to like you and me? I don't know. I think those conversations are really interesting. Maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know. But that to me, or as I'm like, okay, this God does not, is not a part of my suffering in the way like where I can ascribe blame to it. This God instead sits in the suffering with me.
Yeah.
And is inviting me to whatever is available to me. It's like this God sits with me and is present with me and suffers alongside of me. That to me is like, oh, that's the real juice of process. It's like it takes like this God who's up here, like kind of God, and replaces it with the God who is like intimately in the midst of all of it.
Yeah. So the one omni that process theology doesn't get rid of is omni present.
Yes. Yeah. They're like, no, that's the one we keep.
That's the one we keep.
The rest is like
the rest we nuance, but omnipresent is God is present everywhere in all places at all times.
Yeah.
That is the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. It seems like, and based off knowing some of your story, that there was some parallel as you were navigating things in your own life, that you were seeing all these ideas about people that have talked about God in different ways and are really challenging, really problematic views of God.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's and then thing is like, and that to me is like, once I stumbled upon process philosophy, like I really feel like it opened up a whole new like set of ideas for me, because then I'm like, I think about process philosophy and I was like, okay, so what does it mean if the ultimate reality is not hierarchical?
Yeah.
What I mean is ultimate reality is not coercive.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean for our politics? What does that mean for our ethics? What does that mean for how we live our lives and relationship? What does it mean for how we build community? And to me, like that is just like, that's exciting, and that's the juice. But yeah, I think it's really cool.
Moving away from a God that demands because of arbitrary reasons, but a God that invites because the ultimate, the direction, whether there's a end to that direction or whether it's just a direction, is love and beauty and goodness and shalom. Yeah. All right. I'll dive into mine.
Go.
Yeah.
What's your
so
story?
For me, it wasn't as a. I resisted it. I will say that.
It?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
I resisted process theology for a long time, and it sort of crept in, unbeknownst to me,
Okay.
Like,
so when did you first like hear about it? Like, what was your first like?
So
I don't like this.
Yeah. Let me talk about the ways it crept in.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
I can talk about
Yeah.
yeah. So the ways it crept in was, whenever I came to faith, I kind of dove into that classical view of God, that God is in control, and I had some frustrations with that in my own life, as I've shared in my story before on this podcast. I was really had those questions of where is God and why isn't God doing anything about this? Isn't God supposed to do things? And for me, where it started to creep in was when I left a career in teaching and I went into seminary.
Okay.
I was reading all kinds of people, in classes and things like that. And I was also, as I was doing ministry, we had this website that stored a bunch of just really good videos made by the Episcopal Church, actually, called The Work of the People. And it had some of the people you mentioned, like Greg Boyd, Pete Enns, Richard Rohr, Rachel Held Evans, Glennon. It had a bunch of these people that sort of kind of in the, now I would say, in the modern discourse of religion, are the people that we might turn towards when we leave faith or are wondering, is there a different way to operate within faith? So, I had a bunch of those people. And so that's kind of how it crept in. I would share some of those videos. And as I would share them with the goal of creating discussion and discourse, I would start to like, okay, that I can pick that up. I can pick that up. I would say Rob Bell, he uses a lot of language of invitation, and I read and listened to a lot of his stuff. And so that language of God is inviting, or the universe is inviting, or the sacred is inviting you towards love, beauty, goodness, whatever. Yeah. And then when I got, like I said, when I was in seminary, I was reading a bunch of different people, and I think about Serene Jones, which is one of the theologians that I read, that talked about her language was God wills the universe towards flourishing. God wills everyone towards flourishing. And that was a shift in language because will is not a power word. Will is a word of hope for. I hope this for you. I don't dictate it. I don't coerce it. Yeah. So that language started to creep in of invitation and wills and God invites and all this stuff. Yeah. And then as I was in the middle of doing, ministry and trying to find people, and you start to gravitate and read, I purchased Thomas Ord's book, God Can't.
Oh, yeah?
And that's where I hit the wall.
Oh.
Because that title is obviously very provocative.
Oh, yeah,
He did it on purpose.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, fuck that. God can't? Yeah. That's bullshit. So that book sat in my Kindle for a long time. Okay. And I would go to it and I'd be like, oh, yeah, maybe-ish, kind of, I can see that. I can see, okay, his whole thing about God can't, because the way that God operates is through love and invitation. Yeah. And so it's God can't do certain things because God doesn't work like that. God is love, as the scriptures say. Yeah. And I think it wasn't until, honestly, a couple of years ago where, and this is actually when the pandemic happened, and I had a conversation with one of my professors, and this is where I said it crept in. At that moment, I realized most of my professors were informed by process theology, but nobody said anything. Nobody specifically said, right, the way I'm teaching this class comes from a process theology lens. But it cracked my world open, and I was like, oh, all of these professors that I spent all these years with, learning from and reading books that they recommended, that's what they're informed by. And so that's kind of where I started to go from this hard stop to being curious about it. And I would say that's where I'm at now. Yeah. I don't know a lot about process theology. I haven't read some of, the philosophy that informs it, which, you can kind of, there's some threads in there. You talked about the science threads, but there's some threads in philosophy. It's not just even whatever Western Christianity that it's like
Right.
finding other religions and how
Right.
they talk about the
Yeah.
sacred,
Mm-hmm.
even how Eastern Orthodoxy and more Eastern versions of Christianity in general
Yeah.
talked about God. And it's sort of all these things are pointing to maybe this Western understanding of God
Yeah.
has some deficiencies.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at right now, where I'm compelled by the idea.
Yeah.
Because I find it highly problematic, like you said, that if God could,
It doesn't.
why wouldn't have God stopped the
Yeah.
Holocaust?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Right.
If God could, why wouldn't have God intervened in an earthquake that killed 40 to 50,000 people in Syria
Sure.
a couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Yep.
It doesn't match with many other disciplines.
Right.
But when you open yourself up to this process theology of understanding, your spirituality seems to match up with things like art even, and the way that other religions are talking about meaning and direction in the universe. And so it's really interesting how it almost allows you to then look at all those, not with suspicion, but look at them with curiosity and letting God teach you through those things. And so it almost, basically the best way to describe it is it opens you up to
Right.
God,
Yeah.
which is like so interesting, because when you close fist hold on to a classical version of God, it's so limited.
Right.
But when you open yourself up to that, you're like, oh, this tree outside in my backyard, as I look at it and watch as it does life, because a tree's alive, right?
Yeah.
There's something about God's doing in there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's compelling about it to me.
Yeah. That'll work.
Yeah,
That's good.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna keep going. Like I said, I personally don't have a lot of understanding of it. So I'm excited to learn with the listeners.
Well, I don't know how.
We'll learn together too.
Yeah. So I said, I'm a seminary dropout. It wasn't for me.
But you are a book nerd, so
yeah. But I don't know. Like, I just consume a lot of things and struggle to remember my wife's birthday sometimes. But I can tell you a lot of really dumb shit. Like, so it's not that helpful, really. It's better to remember your wife's birthday. Let me tell you that.
There's an invitation there.
Hey, boom, process party. So yeah, I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I'm excited
cool.
too. All right, do you want to end with what's hyping us up?
It's hyping us up. Hype zone. This weekend I got 2 rounds of disc golf in.
Yeah.
So I am not a good disc golf player. I've played maybe a dozen times. I've had a dozen rounds, maybe, probably less. And I'm not very good, but like I really enjoyed it. Like the weather's getting nice here in the Midwest, and we had like a really nice weekend. It was a little windy. And so, but like it was really fun to get out and just it's outside. It's very meditative. Like you're throwing a disc.
You're walking.
It kind of puts you in your body, but also at the same time, like I'm not like inherently good enough to like understand. Like sometimes I throw it and it goes straight, and I'm like, awesome. And sometimes I throw it and I think I throw it the same way, but it's like it goes off in another direction, and it's like now I have to like climb through the woods to find this thing. And like the line between like what made it do this and what made it do this, like I think I'm figuring out what it is. And so it's this process of like, I don't know, it's good to suck at something.
Yeah.
It's good to be like, I don't get this.
Yeah.
And try to like go on this journey of trying to figure out like, how do I get this to do what I want it to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, it's fun. That's what I like about it. Everyone's like, oh, like I'm not good at it. And it's like, it's cool. But yeah, no, that's what I've been hyping me up lately.
It's good to be a novice. I heard from somebody that I work with that was saying that it's every 4 years or so, it's good to try something new that you don't know much about.
Yeah.
Honestly, for me, I played some disc golf as well, but it's just the weather in general. We're in the Midwest, and so we don't get 70-degree nice weather like whatever people on the West Coast in California do.
It's either really fucking cold or really fucking hot. It's like you get maybe like a few weeks in the middle where it's the transition, but like most of the time it's like, well, you want it really cold or you want to sweat? Like
that's all you get.
Yeah, that's all you get.
So we're in that like small little window
yes.
of the nicer where you can wear a t-shirt and jeans or wear a hoodie if you want to, or a long sleeve shirt. Like the wardrobe options are varied. So nice weather. Great time to do outdoor activities. So that's what's jazzing me up.
But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a great episode. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you enjoy this process theology series as we explore it ourselves and talk a little bit about it and why it's meaningful to us.
Awesome. Cool.
All right. Sweet.
All right. Have a good one.
See ya.
See ya.